The final chapter of Voss's legend began not with a chase, but with a silence deeper than any he'd ever orchestrated. Word spread from sailor to sailor. The sable hook hadn't been seen in weeks. Merchant ships passed unmolested. The waters, once disturbed by psychological warfare, were eerily calm. And in a world where fear had a face, its sudden absence became its own form of terror. You might think such peace would bring relief, but no. The captains of the Caribbean knew better. The eye of the storm is always calmest just before it strikes again. And when a man like Voss disappears, you don't celebrate, you double the watch. But what if the storm never returns? When the sable hook was finally spotted again, it wasn't off the coast of Jamaica or Cuba, but drifting, anchor dropped near a desolate quay in the Exumas. No sails up, no signal flags, just stillness, like a monument left behind by a god who'd abandoned it. A small salvage crew from a Bahamian trader approached cautiously. They found no damage. The ship's stores were full, guns loaded, the decks were clean, not a single drop of blood. But the crew was gone. Every man, every trace of human life, vanished. Only one thing remained, the captain's cabin locked from the inside. They broke the door open. Inside, they found Voss's coat neatly folded on the desk, his hat placed atop it like a tombstone. A half-burned lantern sat nearby, the last of its wax melted into the wood. And pinned to the wall in the exact center was a sheet of parchment with just 4 words. Did you follow light? That was it. No name, no signature, no clues. Just the question. A question not meant to be answered, but to infect. Because that's what Voss was in the end. Not a man, not even a myth, but a question. A wound in the certainty of the world. And questions linger. Some said he staged the whole thing, that he and his crew slipped ashore on rowboats and lived out their lives under false names, watching the sea from afar. Others swore he found what he'd been looking for, a map, a code, a forgotten island, and left the known world behind entirely. There were darker stories, too, that he went mad, that his crew mutinied, that he sailed into some place no map could hold, lured not for gold or glory, but for the need to disappear completely. But the truth? There is no truth, only the light, and what you choose to follow. And now you know, the fleet that night, it wasn't just tricked, it was transformed. Its commanders began to see enemies in each other. Its formations dissolved, not under fire, but under suspicion. They didn't lose to a pirate. They lost to a possibility, to the terrifying idea that everything they knew about war, about order, about power, could be undone by a single flicker in the dark. You don't need a cannon to start a war. Sometimes all it takes is a lantern and the mind that knows where to place it. So, the next time you're sailing through the fog, literal or otherwise, and you spot a light moving where no light should be, ask yourself, are you chasing a ship or are you following fear itself? Because the most dangerous pirate who ever lived didn't kill his enemies. He made them destroy each other.
For a while, it seemed as if Voss had become untouchable, not just in body, but in myth. He became a ghost the sea whispered about, a mind other captains dreaded even more than his ship. Some claimed he could vanish into mist, that he spoke no words during battle, that he could read a man's intentions before he spoke them. But the truth was simpler and far more terrifying. Voss understood silence, not the kind born from cowardice or retreat, but the kind that unnerves, that leaves your mind clawing for explanation. He weaponized that stillness, both on the sea and within his crew. His men followed him not out of love, not even out of fear, but out of the unsettling clarity that he always knew something they didn't. And what is loyalty, if not the desperate urge to remain close to what you do not understand? You, sitting safely now, ask yourself this: would you trust a man who never panicked, never raised his voice, never explained himself? Could you follow someone who kept secrets even from the men he fed and paid? Could you live under the shadow of a mind that sees you as a pawn in a much greater game? Voss's crew did. And they reaped the rewards: gold from galleons, food from rich cargo ships, water from intercepted navy vessels. But with each victory, something began to shift. The man who had once been their shield against chaos had become chaos itself. Voss no longer waited for storms to pass, he invited them. He sailed into enemy lanes not for survival, but to test their resolve. It was as if the lantern incident had unlocked something deeper in him, a taste for control, not over ships, but over fear itself. One sailor, Rig, a carpenter's mate, once confessed in a tavern that during one quiet voyage, Voss had stood over him in the dark and asked, "How long do you think it would take for a man to go mad?" Hearing nothing but waves. No threat, no anger, just a question, spoken with unsettling curiosity. That was who Voss was becoming. Not merely a strategist, but a philosopher of fear. He began to craft illusions not just for his enemies, but for his own men. Whispers that rival crews had defected to him, rumors that a cursed island held his treasure. On one voyage, he had a lifelike dummy of himself lashed to the mast of a decoy vessel, sailing alone toward a Spanish warship. The distraction allowed his real ship to board and overtake from behind, unseen. When the Spanish captain found the dummy, he was said to have muttered only, "He is not a man, he is a thought." And what do you do when the enemy becomes a thought? You stop sleeping well. You question your own men. You avoid the fog. You see a flicker of light and wonder, is it him? Or is it fear, finally made flesh? But here lies the tragedy. As Voss built his myth, he began to disappear inside it. The man who had once used illusion to protect himself now seemed unable to live outside it. He could no longer tolerate stillness unless it was planned. He avoided shore leave. He stopped eating with the crew. His voice grew rarer until commands came only through glances and hand signs. He had become the ghost they all believed him to be. One night, while anchored off a coral atoll near Tortuga, a storm rose unexpectedly. His ship, the Sable Hook, was lashed by rain and waves. The crew panicked, looking for orders, but Voss remained locked in his cabin, staring at maps, drawing circles, measuring nothing but water and time. When the storm broke, they found him on deck, soaked, motionless, watching the horizon, as if expecting something to rise from it. "Captain," his first mate dared to ask, "what are we waiting for?" Voss didn't answer. Instead, he raised his arm, pointing not to the sea, but to the lantern, hanging again from the mast, unlit. And that's when they understood. He was no longer using the lantern to fool others. He was using it to test himself. Would the enemy come? Would the legend hold? Would fear still work? You see, Voss didn't just outsmart a fleet. He trapped himself in the mirror of his own brilliance. Because once you become a ghost, even your own crew wonders if you're real.
To know Voss was to know restraint.
He didn't drink heavily. He didn't shout. He didn't punish without reason. His crew feared him not because he barked orders, but because he didn't need to. Orders were few, quiet, and unquestioned. There was an intensity in the way he observed the world, as if every gesture, every sail fluttering in the wind, every hesitation in a crewman's eyes was part of a larger equation he was silently solving. And yet, for all his intellect, Voss was haunted. You could see it in the way he never slept through the night, in how he would stand alone on deck for hours, watching the stars not with wonder, but calculation. He was always measuring distance, timing, fate. Some men chase gold, others chase glory. Voss seemed to chase certainty in a world that refused to offer any. There were whispers among his crew, of course. They said he once loved a woman who vanished aboard a ship that was never found. Others said he was once betrayed by his own brother and left for dead in a port city no map would name. But no one dared ask. What was known was this: he trusted no one fully, not even his first mate. He had backup plans for his backup plans. And that night with the lantern, that wasn't the first time he'd used misdirection, but it was the first time he'd let the story spread. You see, Voss understood something that most pirates ignored. Memory is a weapon. The human mind isn't a logbook, it's a theater, and fear is the best playwright. When sailors returned to port with stories of Voss, they weren't just recounting facts, they were shaping legend. And legends last longer than cannonballs. But legends, too, have a cost. 1 month after the lantern incident, Voss found himself pursued again, this time by ships that didn't fall for tricks. The Royal Navy had caught wind of his tactics and sent a warship outfitted not with more guns, but with smarter eyes. The HMS Cresswell, captained by Elias Grant, a man who'd once studied mathematics at Cambridge before turning to the sea. Grant had read the accounts. He wasn't impressed. "A trickster with a torch," he reportedly said. "Smoke and mirrors. Let's see what he does when we turn down the lights." Voss knew they were coming. He always knew. But this time, something was different. The sea was not on his side. A windless week pinned him in a stretch of open water with little cover. His crew grew anxious. The usual confidence, the eerie calm that defined his command, began to fracture. Whispers turned to questions. Would the lantern work again? Would the fog return? Voss said little, but that night he brought the crew on deck, all of them, silent, expectant. He held the lantern in his hands, not swinging it, not hanging it, just holding it. The glow lit his face in flickers, casting long shadows over his eyes. "You think this saved you?" he asked, the flame reflecting in his dark gaze. No one spoke. He set the lantern down and kicked it over. The flame hissed out. It wasn't the light, it was what they thought it meant. Then for the first time in weeks, he smiled, not out of joy, but because he understood that they had started to believe in the symbol more than the strategy. And that was dangerous. Because when you believe the tool is the power, you forget the mind behind it. That night, with no lantern, no fog, and no escape wind, Voss did something even more audacious. He sailed directly toward the Cresswell. No tricks, no shadows. A single black sail against a moonless sky. And just before dawn, something strange happened. The Cresswell turned away. No battle, no contact. Later, sailors would swear they saw a second ship, larger, darker, emerging behind Voss's in the gloom. But no such ship was ever reported. Was it real? Or had the idea of Voss grown so large that even Captain Grant had hesitated? That is what makes a legend lethal. Because it doesn't just outsmart your fleet, It makes you doubt your eyes. And in that moment of doubt, you lose everything. The morning sun cast a pale, golden sheen across a sea that had turned eerily quiet. Smoke from the crippled ships still rose in slow, curling spirals, carried lazily by a breeze that had arrived too late to matter. The wreckage floated like wooden ghosts, burned masts, splintered beams, the occasional dark shape of a sailor's hat or boot adrift. It was the kind of silence that followed not just defeat, but confusion. No one could agree on what had happened. Had they seen Voss's fleet? Were they ambushed? Why had their own cannon fire done more damage than any pirate could? The truth never arrived with fanfare. It slipped in through doubt, through the disintegration of certainty. That was Voss's true genius. He turned the mind into a battlefield, and most men never realized they were even fighting. You must understand something. In the age of piracy, survival wasn't about brute force alone. Storms, scurvy, betrayal, starvation, these were constant companions. But Voss knew that the real enemy wasn't out there in the sea. It was in here, in the minds of men who feared the unknown more than death itself. And so he made himself unknown. He became the embodiment of misdirection, of mystery, of that flicker just at the edge of vision. Back aboard his own vessel, Voss stood by the railing, his eyes fixed on the horizon, not with pride, but calculation. He did not cheer. He never did. Victory to him was not a reason to celebrate. It was merely the proof that the equation had worked. The lantern had done its job. But to think Voss was merely cold and tactical would be to miss the deeper truth. This man wasn't born into cruelty. He had known hardship, yes, but his cruelty, if one could call it that, was a response to something deeper, the quiet rage of being underestimated. Voss had once served aboard a merchant ship under a captain who laughed at his ideas, who ridiculed intellectuals among the crew. "You think you'll win battles with books?" the captain sneered. And perhaps that was the seed, the moment he realized that strategy, pure, disciplined thought, was more powerful than any sword. So he became the storm that no one could see coming, and in doing so, he changed the very rules of pirate warfare. Consider what it meant. One man, with one ship, brought a coordinated naval pursuit to its knees using nothing but timing, silence, and the psychology of suggestion. He never needed to engage. He never needed the final blow. Instead, he turned the enemy's strength into their vulnerability. You could almost feel him saying, without words, "The louder you shout, the less you listen." And therein lies the lesson for you. In moments of chaos, what do you chase? The light or the truth? It wasn't just a victory for Voss that night. It was a message, and messages mattered in those days. Pirates thrived not just on gold, but on legend. A name that reached the right port at the right time could empty a merchant's hull before a cannon was ever loaded. Voss knew this. He counted not just ships, but stories. He made sure that the survivors of the fleet would talk, that they would whisper of the light in the fog, that they would speak of a man who didn't fight like a pirate at all. And they did. Within a week, sailors in Kingston were muttering tales over their rum. "He moves like a shadow. Don't follow the lantern. It's not what it seems." And just like that, Voss grew larger than life. His real weapon wasn't the lantern. It was reputation, that most volatile of currencies on the sea. Now imagine being a captain, hearing that story for the first time. Would you pursue him, knowing what happened to those who tried? Would you trust your own eyes in the dark?
Or would you, like so many others, turn your ship just slightly off course, just slightly away from that faint flicker on the water, just in case? That was the power of Voss. He didn't just outsmart a fleet. He rewrote the emotional topography of the sea. And yet, the deeper you look, the more you wonder, was it just strategy? Or was there something in him, something he feared, something he was always sailing away from, even as he seemed to sail toward it?
It wasn't cannon fire that defeated the fleet that day. It wasn't brute strength or overwhelming numbers. It was a single flicker of flame in the night, an old lantern swinging quietly from the mast of a ship thought to be fleeing. What was he really after? Why did it all work so perfectly? The year was 1712. The waters just off the Windward Passage were alive with tension. A notorious pirate, known only by the moniker Voss, had drawn the ire of a formidable alliance of merchant ships and naval vessels. Not because of the sheer number of ships he'd plundered, though that number was high, but because of how he did it. Voss didn't rely on terror alone. He relied on perception, on illusion, on making men see what they feared most, each other. And in that, he found a power far greater than powder and shot. Voss was not loud like Blackbeard, nor extravagantly cruel like Calico Jack. He was quiet, clean-shaven, calm, deliberate. His clothes were practical but immaculate. His crew described him as the stillness before the squall. That calm demeanor concealed a razor-sharp intellect. He didn't just want loot. He wanted to orchestrate chaos, to let entire fleets collapse from the inside, their own confusion, doing the damage he never had to. And on one fog-choked night off the coast of Hispaniola, he accomplished exactly that, with one simple lantern. Now imagine you were aboard one of those ships. The night is heavy, and you haven't slept well. Whispers about Voss circulate like ghost stories. You've heard the tales, how he never appears where he should, how ships vanish into mist after crossing his path. You're clutching a musket that feels cold even in your sweating hands. You look out to the sea and spot it, a faint glow, bobbing in the darkness. Just a lantern, but moving, slowly, methodically. That's the moment Voss wins, not in the battle, but in your mind. The strategy began days earlier. Voss had trailed the fleet from a distance, charting their rhythms, their blind spots. They believed he was fleeing, a lone pirate hunted down by 6 well-armed ships in formation. That belief was his weapon. He allowed them to believe he was desperate, reckless, that he had no choice but to run. But in truth, Voss was setting a trap not in the sea, but in their minds. The lantern came into play when the moon vanished behind thick clouds. He ordered his crew to extinguish all but one light, carefully shielded behind a makeshift hood, allowing it to flicker only in one direction. Then he anchored in the black, unmoving. The wind was dead, the current nearly still. He ordered silence, absolute and reverent, not a whisper, not a cough. For hours they waited, as the enemy crept closer, interpreting the glow as a moving ship, Voss's ship, sailing due east. By the time the fleet began shifting formation to give chase, they were already off course. And when Voss finally moved, it wasn't forward, it was behind them. This was no accident of chance, this was design. He understood the psychology of fear better than most men understood their swords. He knew how the brain fills in gaps when visibility fails, how captains second-guess each other under pressure, how a chain of command frays when no one is quite sure what they've seen. That lantern was not a signal. It was a seed, a single light in the dark made to grow into panic. Can you see it now?
that eerie glow swaying like a ghost in the fog. Crews shouting across decks, orders contradicting each other. One ship fires too early, another breaks formation to flank an enemy that isn't there. Then the mist breaks, and the ships see each other. They see silhouettes not of pirates, but of their own allies. Too late. Cannon fire rips the air. Voss didn't sink a single ship himself that night, but by dawn, 2 ships were drifting, ablaze and rudderless. A third had run aground trying to escape what it believed was an ambush. The others scattered, certain that Voss had more allies in the fog. There were none. He never had a fleet. He never needed one.